Good afternoon. Thanks everyone for joining our webinar, Where Are Your Data Protection Blind Spots? We have a lot of material to cover today on this issue, including some examples of what can happen if you don't identify and address your data blind spots, ways that you could do that, including a review of a couple of recent case studies. And then we're going to end the session with a Q&A. And so please submit questions via the chat box as we go, and we'll answer as many as we can live. And if there are questions that we can't get to in the live session, we will follow up with you directly. We really do want to make sure that you're getting the value out of spending the time with us today. So first up, I am Tracy Fox. I am the Partner Channel Director and today's moderator. Tom Allen is also with Foresite. He is our Information Security Officer. And Foresite is a cybersecurity and compliance services firm. We help clients from SMB to enterprise minimize their cyber risk and protect their data through our various cyber testing, consulting solutions, and our proprietary provision solution, which we'll talk a little bit today in how we work in the case studies. I specifically work with our resellers to enable them to offer our services because we are channel only. And Tom, as a technical resource, works directly with our customers. So he's going to be discussing some of the case studies that he's been involved with related to data protection. We are also joined by Brian Berglund. He's the founder and CEO of Armarius Software. Brian has over 20 years of IT-related experience and a proven track record for delivering software solutions for managed service providers from Fortune 500 to SMB companies. His current security platform provides data loss prevention and endpoint protection that monitors and manages user errors as well as malicious behavior. So Brian has a lot of insights on solutions for meeting regulatory compliances along with desktop risk assessments and IT policy and procedures, believing that data security should be a proactive approach and know now what you need to know. If you don't find out till later, it's going to be too late. The key issues that we're covering today really show why we partnered with Armarius, because this combination of our solutions provides the additional security and visibility that our resellers and clients can use to solve some of the issues, such as data classification. What data does the organization maintain or transmit? You would be shocked at how many times we go into organizations and they can't even answer that question, because think about how much data collects over years and years of time and staff changes and all of the compliance changes. So it's very hard to stay on top of that. Does any of this data fall under compliance requirements for protection, which include monitoring? Again, 20 years ago, if people were putting credit card information onto a hard drive, there wasn't anything called PCI to protect credit card data. So there's a lot more requirements around protection today than there ever were. Insider threats. Now you've got all this data. What is the staff doing with sensitive data? And who's monitoring the controls that might be in place to know for sure what is or isn't being done with the data? And then data leakage. Where's the sensitive data and who can access it? So what are those leakage points where the data might go from being within our four walls and our care to getting exposed to the outside world? So again, just a quick reminder to use the chat window to submit questions and then stay on at the end to hear them answered live, because we're going to jump right in to some examples of what can happen when data goes unprotected. So Brian, I know you love to tell this story of Garrett Popcorn Company. What happened with Garrett? How was this a case of a data blind spot?
Garrett's former director of research was one of only 3 people who had access to the recipes, which the company thought was enough protection. However, she was able to download 5,400 top secret files to a USB thumb drive and also send them to herself via personal email shortly before she was fired from the company. The stolen data also included information about the company's pricing and distribution, market research, and proprietary processes. The company said in the lawsuit that it will continue to suffer harm until the court enters a restraining order against Putnam that stops her from using, possessing, or benefiting the trade secrets. and that there is no way to undo disclosure once it occurs. Do you know what proprietary data does your organization have that would impact your business if it was exposed?
Yeah, so that's a really good question for everybody on the webinar to think about, is what kind of things. So you're probably not a popcorn company if you're joining us today. You might be, but you're probably not. But what's your secret sauce? What would be really harmful to you and potentially beneficial to your competition if it got exposed? Because the fact that these secret recipes, they're proprietary trade secrets, that whole thing of you can't undo it once it gets out, that's the issue. What amount of damages could they possibly collect to try and recover from that? That's a tough question. So obviously prevention is going to be the preferable thing than trying to recover from a situation like that. This next story is one that I can tell because it came from one of my resellers, and it's an actual client story. So of course, I'm not going to name names on this one, but again, this scenario is really common. So don't get caught up in the point that this is an online marketing firm and that's not what you do. This firm collected information about customers and prospects via an online portal on their website. So when you went onto their website, there was a statement to the effect of, we protect our clients' data. So I'll pause there for just a minute. Think about how many of those sites you go to and maybe how many of those sites your organization might have where you're collecting data. The Federal Trade Commission has been proactive about auditing sites and saying, we want to come in and confirm how you're protecting that data. And that's what happened to these folks. So the FTC contacted them and said, show us how you're protecting the data. Didn't matter that the company wasn't collecting any financial or health data in the portal, and that they did have some protective measures in place. But the FTC cited them for not having, quote unquote, sufficient protection, and they fined them over $100,000. Now, I also want to point out, this was a small business. This was a 2-3 location business, around 100 employees, maybe less, not an enterprise. And another important point is, I know a lot of times when I'm talking to small businesses or even large organizations, they talk about the cyber insurance. Well, I'm covered because I have cyber insurance. Cyber insurance often will not cover fines at all. So the impact to this business initially is over 6 figures right off the bat, even though they didn't expose anything that was valuable to them necessarily from a trade secret perspective, or even harmful to the visitors of the website because it wasn't protected data. So when you think about all of those factors and maybe what you're collecting on a website or in other ways, could you be subject to similar legal action if the data you hold is not properly protected? And another important note on this particular case is that the FTC, Federal Trade Commission, also put them into a 20-year audit program. So the FTC will audit them annually or biannually for 20 years as part of the settlement to this. So it's not just a one-time incident, it's an ongoing impact and cost. And Tom, I know you were involved with another one.
Yeah, so one of the largest hospital groups in New York City had an issue. It can be Googled, it's public knowledge, but anyway, so they had their patient data. They had a doctor who was trying to do his own research program. So this hospital had recently engaged FireEye, so they had spent close to $500,000 between FireEye and Varonis to try and protect their data because they knew their responsibilities. So this doctor decided, well, I can't get this data off, but I need it for my research program. So he put it in Dropbox, which they had no visibility into at the time. Technology wasn't there at the FireEye level to have visibility into that. So they put it all on Dropbox. He then loaded it to his own web server at home. That web server was spidered by Google. And then when Google spidered it, so a patient of the doctor in the hospital Googled his father's name after his father passed away because he wanted to get some info for the obituary. And he found all his health records on Google based on a Google search, which was not good. At the time, the hospital was fined $2 million for the violation, which was the highest It's no longer the highest fine in HHS history, but anyway, the point is, they didn't even know this was happening, and it was outside their purview. That the actual damage was outside their purview, but because they were responsible for the data and they didn't handle it in a proper custodial way, they were fined and had to deal with that fine and being on HHS's wall of shame.
So another great point. Do you know for certain that your staff isn't doing things with data that could expose your organization? Because obviously this doctor did not go to the IT team and say, can I put this data unencrypted up on Dropbox? Oh, and by the way, not only is it unencrypted and not de-identified, it's also clearly identifying the hospital that it came from. So he went completely around the system, but he had access to the data to be able to do that. And that's the key that we're talking about. That was a real blind spot for that hospital. So now that we've seen some examples of data blind spots, and more importantly, what can happen if you don't proactively address them, Brian, let's talk a little bit about how Armarius helps our clients to get the visibility and the control that they have to prevent these issues.
Sure, Tracy, sure. Our software solution, the Scribe Management Suite, has two modules. We call them Secure and Intelligence, that can help any organization with where data is, who has access to the data, and how the data flows through the network on daily use. Our software manages and monitors the end user, or what's called the end node, where the activity actually occurs. Whether the client likes it or not, the users control the data which they have access to. Users can copy files to removable drives, send emails, upload data to websites or third-party storage like you just heard with Dropbox, as well as print things out. They're also the ones that click the email link that they shouldn't have had clicked. With our solutions, your clients, Tracy, will have something that watches what we call the last 18 inches. I'm sure our listeners just measured their screen to their eyes. On average, it's about 18 inches away. We monitor and manage that end user. We allow the user to know now what they need to know. That's our motto here at Armarius, is to allow the organization to see what's going on that they truly aren't seeing. And based on seeing that information, it's easier to lock down and do security around it. So Tracy, with our solution, your clients will have a proactive solution that will monitor and control user behavior.
So let's step back to the first point. How do you help clients determine where that sensitive data is and then who has access to it?
Sure. Our software solution, the agent has the ability to scan the network looking for sensitive content in files or file types themselves. We can then report on where those network files are or even tag them to know which ones are which, even on the personal desktops and laptops the users use. This way you can find the sensitive data and know what to do about it. With monitoring the employee, we can show you who has access to that data. The end user or end node is where all the data is accessed, used, or put in motion. There are three areas in data loss prevention: in use, in motion, and at rest. We just talked about finding sensitive data and where it is. That's at rest. In motion means anything leaving, such as email uploads to the browser, any removable devices, and print jobs. And anything in use is actually where the data is being accessed and worked on by the end user.
So what are the most common ways that data is exposed if it's not properly classified and protected?
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, our solution monitors the 4 major leak points and then can shut them down. Let me share you a quick story around the leak points, things that may happen every day. We once worked with a company that had sensitive information about the business stored in SAP. They set it up the best that they knew how. Even the consultants helped them. However, they had areas that were accessible by groups that shouldn't have. The sales staff had access to the secret sauce, basically. Before we were there, they determined that a user took a screenshot of a particular screen and sent that data to themselves via personal email, causing a loss of that proprietary information. So think of that. Two things happened there. One, they had access, which our software solution would have seen and reported. Then they had access to personal email through a browser, which is one of the leak points. Emails, web uploads, print, and removable devices are the 4 leak points of any system. Email attachments is the most common way data leaves. It's probably someone doing their job and not realizing that they sent patient information to the patient unencrypted. Web uploads, like Tom mentioned earlier, I categorize all that in like things with Gmail or even storage apps like Dropbox, where you can just drop a file onto the browser. And then we have removable drives. That's pretty fair to say, everyone knows those, but do you know when you plug in a phone to charge it with a USB cable, that becomes a drive too, just about as big as most hard drives. And then the last leak point that you see that is taken most granted is printers. Yes, not many people print anymore, but wouldn't you want to know that someone just from your sales staff just printed out the entire list of contacts?
That's a really good point. Let's look at the graphic that you put together to show us the top areas of data loss, because this is really interesting. I found this very interesting.
Yes, yes, Tracy, this is a great chart that shows where the data is lost the most. Most commonly, businesses lose data when an employee or contractor or someone that has access to the network puts in a thumb drive and copies out the data they want to. That's portable USB devices. Remember that phone, it's a hard drive. There's storage larger than most of the smallest devices possible. And then email is probably the next highest avenue of loss. That's most common around accidents. Employees trying to get their job done, they just send something out that they shouldn't. Or if they forget to tag the email to even encrypt it.
So you mentioned that Armarius is a proactive solution versus a reaction. Can you provide an example of that?
Sure. I had a client once tell me a story that helped them save face. Basically, the employee was trying to get their job done. They received a phone call from their customer. Can you send me the information about my insurance policy? Sure, they said, and hang up the phone. They went and found the information that they needed to send, and off they sent it. Our solution found that there was sensitive information in the attachment, stopped the email, and had the user encrypt it right then and there in Outlook. We use PKZip to do the encryption. It's password-based, or the software will actually tag the subject line with your encryption solution. The user put the password in, and the software encrypted the file and sent it off to Bob. To make sure that the company was being sensitive to customer service, they called the user Bob. Bob, I sent you the file that you requested. I just wanted to make sure you got the email and was able to decrypt it. He said he didn't get the file. So when the user went back to their sent items, they realized that sent it to the wrong Bobs. I mean, how many Bobs could there actually be? So by protecting the file, the user can feel safe that the other Bob couldn't see that data. That's just one way we stop something bad from happening before it did. There are many other ways the software can proactively prevent things from happening, or at least help the organization electronically enforce security policies that they have written.
That autofill in Outlook, it's a blessing and a curse. How many times have any of us accidentally sent something to the wrong person when we started typing in the name? So you really saved them on that one. So tell us a little bit about the solution itself and how it's set up.
Yes, we are a Windows-based software solution. We use an agent with a minimum footprint on the desktop. It's about 40 megs to install. We like to say we sit above the surface. The agent monitors the user's actions to prevent users from leaking data, as we talked about. Policies can be put in to protect the 4 major leak points. And also with policies, you can not only prevent the leak, you can use the spider to find sensitive data, block screenshots of applications that contain sensitive data, and as well as block applications on where they navigate to. We have prevented users from accessing specific areas of an application, taking screenshots of SAP, like I mentioned, that had formula information, and found sensitive data on laptops and desktops. We give your infrastructure another layer of security.
So just in case there are some folks on who are not super technical, user policy meaning who has access and what they can do with it, right?
Yeah, you set up policies to users or groups or machines to prevent the user from gaining access that they may not need to have access to, or you didn't know they have access, and the software will report that activity as well.
And let's take a look at the dashboard too, because I think this is a really good way to see how quickly you can get a viewpoint into some of these blind spots. You want to walk us through the dashboard, Brian?
Yes, this is our intuitive dashboard. It allows IT administrators or the individuals in the group to be able to click through options and see what users have access to. You can set the policies in the dashboard in the console to set down to your users to prevent the IT security policies that you're putting into place.
How many users can you set up with your policy?
This is one of our sample policies. With the easy-to-use interface, the administrator, the keeper of the sensitive data, can set up policies for the organization. The software is built out to support the 3-user retail shop, like a Subway or something like that, and then all the way up to the tens of thousands of users.
What are some of the other policies that you find clients like to use?
We have a very robust and granular solution that controls the entire desktop. However, we made it simple to block or control the first threat where data leaks with the email blocking of hardware, blocking of print and web uploads. You can control the data where it may be leaking, but you also have the granularity to block a specific screen with inside of an application. We tend to start with, let's know now what you need to know by putting our default policy in place to collect the truth, the fact of what the users do with data. And then from there, if you knew what the employees did with data that they had access to, we could better do a job of securing it. As users generate actions, events are created, sent up to the server, even has alerting capabilities to allow you to alert on when somebody's putting files on a thumb drive. It's better to send the security guard to go over to get that user rather than letting them walk out the front door, right?
Oh yeah, as we saw, you can't recover too much once something like that gets exposed. It's not a good situation. So what industries and markets do you see the greatest need for this type of solution?
Our solution is agnostic. However, we do get a lot of companies and industries that meet regulatory compliance, such as healthcare, banking, finance, not-for-profit, and legal. Think of things like NIST, HIPAA, SOX, and PCI type requirements. There's also another area you really don't think about because of loyalty to employees is manufacturing. Manufacturers need to protect their what they call secret sauce, just like Garrett's needed to. We have companies using our solution today to protect their secret sauce. Even if companies do not lock down right away, they do use a solution like ours for a forensic solution too, to know now what they need to know. The last 18 inches, remember that from earlier? Putting facts around
Right.
actions. You can assess someone and ask questions without a lie detector. It's hard to know the true facts.
Excellent. And I know, Tom, we're going to get into the case studies now because this kind of solution is so important for our resellers and our clients. And I know you have a couple of clients that recently deployed the solution because they identified gaps in their cybersecurity and compliance. So can you start telling us about the national underwriter client and their challenges that led you to Armarius?
Sure. So this client, first to understand their business model, they administer Medicaid programs and some other programs for various states. So as you could imagine, since their sole business is around the states, if anything were to get out publicly about them having some kind of breach, every state that wasn't involved in the breach will jump off and so quick and they'll never get another client. So it, reputational risk to them is everything. And if you read breach reports like I read them, there's numerous times I'll read a breach report and I'll go, yeah, so what? I mean, the data, right? The data is what matters. And if the data wasn't breached, was inconsequential, okay, yeah, they got to firm up their cybersecurity, but it's not that big a deal. But in this case, any breach is going to put them out of business. So we got to look at it from that aspect. Now, the second aspect that was a challenge for them is EPHI. What is EPHI? Okay, a social security number, I can say, okay, that's 3 numbers, 2 numbers, 4 numbers. A phone number, a birth date. DLP by itself, looking at strings, doesn't often catch EPHI because where's the data? It's embedded in an X-ray. It's embedded in an MRI. It's hard for that DLP solution to just look at the data, read it, and know what it is, and therefore do its job. So, when we had those challenges, this client, I've been working with them for 10 years. They take this very seriously. They have a lot of tools and a lot of process in place. So this year we're doing the risk assessment and we're saying those are our biggest risks. Our biggest risk is not classifying data properly or any kind of breach winding up in the press. So we started looking at the Armarius solution as a possible fix and replacement for their original DLP, which was very string-based in normal DLP. And what we found was that Armarius really suited our needs better because we can just tag that data and it doesn't matter. If it's in a certain folder, it's not going anywhere with Armarius as opposed to, say, a semantic DLP or a traditional DLP type of solution.
Yeah,
Awesome. And then, Brian.
By providing you with email attachment reports, USB usage, application uses by the user, and then we even went along and implemented those email attachments with the tagging capabilities like you had mentioned.
Yeah, being able to show that stuff to the auditors is huge because that's a good sense for them of how thoroughly that data is being protected. And then the second case study, Foresite really stresses the importance of proactive incident response with our clients. preparing to be able to address various type of incidents. And a lot of times clients focus on an outside attacker or malware, less on more common things like hardware failure, natural disasters. But one of the incident response consulting projects in Boston resulted in another introduction of Armarius because of what they found to be their greatest risk. Tom, can you talk about that one?
Sure. So again, there's a rather advanced and mature cybersecurity practice there. So we were doing an incident response plan, and we were putting together a tabletop exercise, which, maybe you know this, but basically you sit around a table and you say, what's your biggest nightmare? What would you, this particular stakeholder or data custodian or whatever, what would be your worst nightmare? So because they have a lot of these protections in place, it came down to one of the biggest things that they didn't like, and forgive me for using the title of the thing, was the blind spot they had on the user's desktop and the user's OneDrive and My Documents. They felt like they controlled, and they do control their data on servers really well. So they have good classification, they have red, blue, yellow, everything is tagged, everything is, sort of classified as to what level of protection. They didn't know what was on the user's immediate purview. They didn't know what they were doing with stuff and where they were putting it on the local desktop. So one of the nightmare scenarios came up was, we lose a laptop's stolen. Do we know what was on that? If we can't say for sure in the world of compliance and breach notification, if you can't say for sure that you know what was on that laptop, then you have to report that every piece of data you have was breached, because you can't prove otherwise. So again, a good situation for Armarius. The great thing about it is, because they already have this mature practice, we could basically take that red data, and Armarius Software could go on the desktop as an agent and say, hey, if you see a user put this piece of data in their desktop or on their OneDrive, move it back to the server. And that's what it does. And then they had a second challenge that Armarius helped them with, is they have specific requirements for data deletion. Makes it 6 years. At 6 years, that data has to be deleted. Again, if they don't know where it is, how do you delete it? And also, how do you know the date? Who's going to keep track of all these dates? And so with the Armarius ability to tag data, we've been able to solve that problem by using tags to indicate when a file is ready to be deleted.
Excellent. Now, all this data is great to have, but if no one's paying attention to it, then that's a problem, because then you still might not know something unusual that you need to dig into. So Tom, can you talk a little bit about how the log info from Armarius and other sources is collected in our Provision solution and monitored?
Sure. So Provision is basically a managed SIM. Some people would call it an MDR, some people would call it something else, but basically what it does is it collects logs from all over the place, all over your organization, wherever you feel your sensitive data is. It gathers all this information. It uses our secret sauce to basically regulate, normalize that information so that we can we're trying to see the bad thing, right? So the hard part of seeing the bad thing is that 90% of what goes on normally on a network, under certain context, in certain situations, could be the bad thing. To know evil, you must know normal. So we got to figure out what normal is, and then look for the anomalies and the deviations. So that's the goal with Provision, is to collect all this data from all over your network, and then put the pieces together, the puzzle together, to form a picture so that our SOC agents who are watching this 365, 24/7 know when, hey, this is normal behavior, this is a problem. Now, the logs of Armarius are part of that. The logs of your other endpoint protections are part of that. All of that comes together to give us a vision. I always liken it to painting a picture, or a puzzle is a good one too. But if you just draw the outline of the puzzle, if you're just looking at firewall logs and you've got someone in your SOC looking at your firewall logs, okay, but they're only seeing the outline of the picture. What if you colored that in? What if you showed the picture from behind the tree or behind the house? That's what we want to get, is that full 360-degree look. And then we want to be able to, again, find the bad thing, find evil, and act. And that's really the goal of Provision.
And from a reseller's perspective, I think it's important to note that you can use this as a powered by Foresite solution so that you can have the visibility. If you're responsible for handling these things for your clients, we can co-manage firewalls, which is almost unheard of in the MSSP industry. Usually an MSSP will lock you out. In our scenario, client and or reseller can have access to the change control as well. And we're really combining the best of a SIM tool and MSSP service within this solution. So you don't have the expensive licensing per device that you have to renew, and no need for full-time resources on staff. So again, we talk about scalability. This allows an SMB to have this level of protection as well as larger clients. If you are a reseller or a client and you're thinking about some of the other aspects, especially in the case studies that we've talked about, we do have other services within our Provision Security suite that include things like cybersecurity testing, so penetration testing, social engineering, how susceptible is your staff to clicking on that email or letting someone carrying a pizza box into your data center so that we can plug into your network. We have some really fascinating stories that we'll have to tell on another webinar about some of our successes with social engineering. Ongoing vulnerability management, one of the other big risk areas for businesses is when they have known vulnerabilities that go unpatched, and they go unpatched a lot of times because the resources are just stretched too thin. They're keeping things running day to day, but they're not able to be as proactive as they need to. So the risk to the organization is much greater than it should be. And then compliance audits. If you truly need to address all of the various requirements of any of the PCI, HIPAA, NIST, GDPR, not just the monitoring piece, not just the data protection piece. Those are all avenues that we can assist you with. But really focusing today with Armarius and Foresite and how we deal with the insider threats in that last 18 inches, that end user. Now, we purposely left a lot of time so that we could get to your questions, and I have seen some pop up. So let's jump into that. First question is, what is the relationship between Foresite and Armarius? And I can take that one. We have a partnership in which Foresite's customers can leverage this other layer of security that we can monitor through our Provision solution, but it's not an exclusive thing. So if you're only interested in Armarius or you only wanted to monitor, but you already had a DLP solution that you were happy with, you can work with either one of us. And we're two separate companies. We just came together and thought it was important to present this information together because of the synergy and how the two together solve that blind spot issue by identifying where the data is, putting controls around it, and then having that monitoring so you know that what's actually happening and if there is something that needs to be addressed. Okay, Brian, this one's for you. What happens if an employee tries to copy sensitive files? Will I be notified?
Yes, so once the solution's installed, it tracks all user activity with data and finds sensitive content. So if they were to copy files to a thumb drive, the event gets sent to this console. The console then would fire an alert rule to either the customer or your SOC, Tracy. And then once those notifications are sent, actions can be occurred. Okay,
let's see. Can I see what has happened in the past if I install this solution? So Brian, that would go to you as well.
Thanks, that's a good question. We don't go back in time because what happened already happened. We can only look moving forward. So remember the story of the user sending the attachment to Bob, sending the financial information over with our encryption solution, and she did the whole customer service, followed up with Bob to make sure she got the email. Those are the things that can happen proactively. Another time with those alerts that we just talked about in the last question, a user installed Dropbox, IT was notified, and then they were able to go remove the permissions locally on the device and make sure that she didn't copy any files off. And then we also did one with a bank with a security guard was actually notified when an employee at a remote location was copying files to a thumb drive. He was able to stop the thumb drive, just like you'd see in the movies. They didn't have to stick it in the coffee cup to get it past the security door. The security alert already came that so-and-so copied files to a thumb drive, and then they were able to go over there and grab the files.
Wow. That's just like in the movies, like you said. Can picture that one. All right. Is this a solution that it can really work for an SMB client? So, Brian, from Armarius' side, answer that question.
Yes, we can, like I said earlier, we can install on a client that's got 3 users or 15 users, all the way up to the tens of thousands. We have event collectors and event admins that can be spun up to handle more events.
Yeah, from the Foresite side, our smallest client on the provision side is a single location. They have one sonic wall firewall, and that's all they have us monitoring at that particular account. So that's as small as you can get. And then we have a group of 17 colleges and universities that we're monitoring. We have a financial client that manages over 350 different locations, and we're monitoring over $7 billion worth of assets for them. So it's everything in between. All right, Tom, here's one for you. What industries, can the auditor answer what industries need a data loss preventative type solution?
Sure. So for starters, obviously you have compliances that require that you have one. DoD's compliance, the DFARS, there's HIPAA, there's PCI. So there's that obligation that if you fall under those things. But even if you don't, if you look at the European Union's GDPR and the California Privacy Act and so forth. So these protections are going to have to spread a lot more as time goes on, because how do you know where that data is and who's leaking it? Okay, so I don't fall under privacy other than my own employees. Well, what if you're manufacturing a private industry, or, for example, a company that makes pasta that I've worked with before that has recipes? What are your Death Star plans? What are the things that you cannot have leak? Don't you want to know that they're not leaking? So, I mean, it kind of becomes, for everybody, really, and it's just going to get more and more that way. Eventually, we may have a national cybersecurity law. I don't know, but I think we will more likely have a privacy law for sure.
Yeah, I agree completely with Tom that the industries that deal with the most amount of compliance are ones that would need something like ours, or what you guys do too on the SOC side right away, but manufacturing and all the way down. There's even some new stuff coming out in the insurance end with the, what is it, NICS or something, where they're pushing more regulations on those guys as well.
Yeah, and I can say I get calls all the time from resellers who have customers who are asking the reseller themselves sometimes to show how they're protecting data that they might have access to within their clients or on their site that they're securing for the client. Industries that you wouldn't necessarily think of, like advertising firms or marketing firms, or anybody, if you're holding data for somebody else, they want to know how it's being protected. So whether it's truly protected data or not, we're getting those calls every day. So it's harder to find somebody who it wouldn't apply to, honestly, than somebody it would. And it looks like the last question here for Tom, will this solution make me compliant? They didn't say which compliance, but.
Well, first of all, if you're looking for a single solution that's going to make you compliant, good luck finding it, and I hope you can find unicorns too. Some places are selling these compliance packages. You know, I'm not going to say they're all without merit, but the idea that any one thing is going to make you compliant, think of it this way. The people who write and manage these compliance are trying to avoid that because they want you to think about all these aspects. They want you to be able to define your security plan from multiple aspects. So why would there be any one thing, any magic bullet that would solve the problem? And I'm always suspicious of a vendor or a salesperson that might say, oh, my solution will solve all your problems, because we know as cybersecurity practitioners that does not exist, and there's no way for it to exist. And if you understand the mechanisms behind data flow systems, you know why that couldn't be possible. So will it make you compliant? No. It is certainly an aspect of compliance. So take monitoring, for example, in PCI DSS. All of requirement 10 mostly has to do with monitoring, logging, being able to go back later if you need to and recreate a forensic type of situation, what happened at a given time. So we're going to help you a lot with section 10 of requirement 10 of the PCI DSS. We are not going to help you with how you store your data. We're not going to help you with how your incident response plan comes together, although we have impact on that because we're part of your incident response plan, but we're not the incident response plan. We're not requirement 11, we're not requirement 12. We help you with requirement 10. Armarius will help you with specific requirements on where that data is and who accessed it, who was given permission, least privilege, things like that. Again, I want to stress, there is no one solution to compliance.
I know, just thinking about the payment card industry data security standard alone, how many requirements are there in that one, roughly?
I think it's in the 400s if you do the entire DSS.
Right. So that would explain it. But it really covers some of the key areas of where your true risk is. That was the last question. We are going to send out an email to all attendees with some additional information, including how you can get a WebEx demo or some sample pricing. If you do have other questions that come to mind, or you want to learn more about either company or our reseller program, our reseller program has no legal agreement, no quota requirements. We make it as easy as possible. I can be your point person for that at tracyfox@foresite.com. Or you can also visit foresite.com, become a partner page on our website. You can get some info there and fill out a form if you'd like more. But I want to thank everybody for joining us. I want to thank Tom and Brian for those real examples. And we'll give you back a few minutes of your day.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.